Sustainability Symposium 2023, The Great Conversion. I want to thank all our friends that reached out yesterday to share hello or a note of thanks for the event. It's great hearing from all of you out there. And I think we made some new friends too, which is awesome. And if you weren't able to join us yesterday, well, we had 3 speakers that really represented the wide spectrum of possible action to take on sustainability, from federal legislation to revitalizing a neighborhood. There truly is something that you, yes you, can do to help the effort. Now, if you missed out on any of it, don't fret, okay. It was all recorded and you'll be able to go back and catch up on anything you missed. Every registrant is going to receive a link to the recording. Now, besides all our attendees, I'll tell you one other thing we're grateful for, our sponsors. They help make this event possible. But who are these sponsors? Well, I'll tell you. Trane Technologies is a world leader in creating comfortable, sustainable, and efficient environments. With a bold set of 2030 sustainability commitments, Trane Technologies is challenging the status quo and taking decisive action now to create a sustainable future where communities thrive, where equality is foundational, and where the environment is protected for future generations. And I wanted to give a specific thank you to Scott, too, who has really been a wonderful supporter of this symposium from the very beginning. And yes, I'm thinking back to that very first in-person event in Orlando many moons ago. Now, we also have Whirlpool as a sponsor, and the Whirlpool Corporation is committed to being the best global kitchen and laundry company. They are in constant pursuit of improving life at home, which is something I think we can all appreciate. In an increasingly digital world, the company is driving purposeful innovation to meet the evolving needs of consumers through its iconic brand portfolio, including Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Maytag, Consul, Brastemp, Amana, Baunecht, JenAir, Indesit, Yumly, and InSinkErator. Now, look, today is a pretty famous day, and I think most, if not all of us, have partaken in the act of giving or receiving a high five. So, on this National High Five Day, I will give a virtual high five to the hostess of the symposium and CEO of Green Builder Media, Sarah Gutterman. I'm tagging you in, so to speak, for your opening thoughts. Take it away, Sarah.
Mike, thank you so much. You're always so great as our moderator and in providing the intro comments for our sustainability symposiums and our webinars. So thank you so much. Thank you also to Mary Kessner, our production manager. You all who attend our symposiums and webinars know that Mary is the wizard behind the curtain that makes it all happen. I will reiterate what Mike said. Thank you to our generous sponsors, Trane Technologies and Whirlpool Corporation, for your continued partnership, because without your support, we couldn't offer groundbreaking events like the Sustainability Symposium, nor could we continue with our relentless quest to enhance the sustainability of the built environment. And thank you also to everyone in attendance. Really happy to have you here today. Yesterday, we heard riveting sessions from Senator Martin Heinrich, founder and co-chair of the Electrification Caucus, decarbonization expert Panama Bartholomew, and urban revitalization specialist Majora Carter. They asked some really interesting and challenging questions and offered suggestions for how we can electrify the built environment, break parts of the status quo that are holding us back from progress, and to do so in a way that builds communities and fosters hope. Today, we have an awesome lineup. I am so excited to hear from Ashlee Piper, hi Ashlee, and Cheyenne Hunt and Reuven Carlisle about the changing consumer zeitgeist, turning talk into action, and realistic ways that we can stay under the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming threshold. It's pretty clear that if we're going to solve for our urgent climate and social justice challenges, we can't remain in a Pavlov-like cycle. Change will require a radical reimagination of our culture and our economic system. But fortunately, change is in the air. Younger generations are forcing a tectonic shift, demanding the explosion of paradigms that underpin our financial and cultural systems. These younger generations are denying the master myth of perpetual economic growth at any cost and the relentless march of progress in the form of extraction and excess. They're calling for a complete restructuring of our society with environmental protection and social equality as guiding principles. Now, while more than half of these individuals believe that humanity is doomed, they're also willing and eager to step up and act, finding new narratives to provide the antidote to their pervasive eco-anxiety. With vision and imagination, these leaders are working to change policy, reform ownership models, transform food systems, and revolutionize energy grids. Our first two presenters today are part of a growing number of millennial and Gen Z activists that are mobilizing to create a radically different future. Our first presenter, Ashlee Piper, is a best-selling author, cabinet-level advisor, and professor of sustainability marketing. She's kind of got it all. Ashlee has unique insight into the compelling longitudinal data around millennial and Gen Z purchasing patterns and habits with respect to sustainability. She has studied how these younger individuals determine the quality and value of products that are really worth their time. And she reminds us that we shouldn't underestimate the impact of what a small action can do to make us feel impactful. What other insights and tips does she have for us? Let's hear from her. Ashlee, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was a wonderful, illustrious intro. I need to bring you with me literally everywhere I go. I really appreciate it. And I'm very appreciative to be here and excited to be part of such a great lineup. Thank you again to Sarah, to Mike, to Mary, to Green Builder Media. I think this lineup is amazing and made even more amazing because you're making it so accessible and free for people. So it's really awesome, and I'm very thankful for it. So yeah, today I think we're going to talk about something a little bit different. Also, bless you for saying like I'm a young activist. I really appreciate that. I would consider myself more of an elder millennial. But today we're going to talk about the Great Resocialization and the new consumer zeitgeist. So really how to market sustainability in an effective way to these younger generations, or what I would call emerging consumers. So let's get right into it, fam. So just a little bit more background about me. I have a bit of an eclectic background, as I'm sure a lot of us who are of a certain age and we work in sustainability do, because there weren't necessarily these kind of traditional paths for us to follow at the time, nor were there really work positions that legitimized working in sustainability. So as Sarah mentioned, I was a cabinet level advisor to 2 governors. I have been a political strategist, and I've also worked in marketing capacities at Fortune 50 companies, startups, nonprofits. So kind of a really holistic view of marketing, as well as messaging lots of different social causes, but especially sustainability. And what I found that was really lacking in that arena was this kind of this fluency in being able to translate really cerebral parts of sustainability, of ESG, especially on a corporate level, to a variety of different audiences, and through marketing as well as just through general communications. And so this is really an area that I think is kind of unsung in sustainability, especially as companies begin to embrace this as more important, and something where we can vastly and greatly improve if we just have a little bit better understanding of the different generational needs and interests and values, and how you can align product offerings as well as services and messaging with those, so that it's a win-win-win for people, planet, and also these organizations. I also do a lot of television segments. I think it's really important, and it's a passion of mine to show people how warm and accessible and fun and what a joyful adventure sustainable living can be. I think that for a long time, there have been significant stigmas around living more sustainably, that it's crunchy, you've got to make your own clothes and mill your own flour, which are both great things, that it's socially isolating and fringy, that it can be expensive and inconvenient. And it is so exciting, having been doing this work for almost 15 years, to see so many organizations that are really debunking those myths and stigmas and making sustainability cooler and more accessible than ever before. And I've done a TED Talk, I've spoken at South by Southwest, the United Nations, and now Green Builder Media. And as Sarah sweetly mentioned, I have a best-selling book called Give a Shit, Do Good, Live Better, Save the Planet. And it's really an eco handbook, kind of a choose your own adventure book for sustainable living. And I also teach marketing for environmental sustainability at Loyola University Chicago, which has been a really elucidating experience because I'm teaching Gen Z about marketing for sustainable products and services, and also political marketing around, how do you communicate a policy or a bill, piece of legislation that you're trying to push through that has to do with sustainability and really get that buy-in. And it's just so fascinating on both sides because I learn so much from my students, and I learn so much about what that matters to them and what is really resonant to them. So I'm going to share some of those learnings here today, and hopefully we all leave a little bit more hip. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. So what's on deck for this presentation? I'm again going to talk about how traditional marketing has actually kindled climate negative consumer habits. I think that this is something that's often overlooked, and we don't realize how entrenched the way we approach marketing and advertising and just messaging in general is really entrenched in consumerism. And I'm speaking to that from a uniquely kind of American and Western perspective. And then booming, but not boomers, understanding the shift in values and needs of younger generations. That's really the vegan meat and potatoes of this presentation, y'all. And then some action items. So what you can do no matter where you work, no matter at what level you're working, what kinds of goods, services, policy that you are promoting that has to do with sustainability, what you can do right now to make those better received, more effective, and generally just a better use of your time so that you can message to these emerging consumer groups. And then we'll do Q&A, which I welcome and absolutely love. All right, so just to clarify and kind of level set, because sometimes we talk about, generations and their respective names, but we don't exactly know when they were necessarily born or who we're talking about. So today we're definitely talking about Gen Z and millennials specifically because they are kind of this emerging or existent consumer group that has a significant amount of both existing purchasing power as well as purchasing potential. Generation Alpha, that's for, a later Green Builder Media Association symposium. And we'll also be talking a little bit in comparison to Gen X and especially baby boomers. So American and marketing and the climate crisis. Lady Liberty, she needs billions of dollars right now. We're just going to get into a little bit of going into the 1940s here for a hot second. So post-World War II, we see this really interesting situation in the West, but especially in the United States, where we have millions of soldiers returning back home who need jobs. So that's like a workforce need. And then we also have this exploding, expanded manufacturing capability from these companies and factories that were making really weapons of war. They were making propellers and guns and, parachutes and things like that, right? And they really ramped up production. And now that the war is over, how are we going to pivot that? And so there's this desire and this idea to pivot this manufacturing capability to something that's going to be more palatable to the public. So this is where we start to see disposable items, the rise of plastic eventually, as well as items of convenience. So think dishwashers and washing machines and all these kind of Jetsons-like contraptions of the late 1940s and 1950s that just kind of continues. And then we also have this purchasing power. So we have Americans, largely white, privileged Americans who have war bonds, billions of dollars collectively in war bonds. So there's a purchasing power and a will there. And at the same time, we have ad agencies who were less maybe buttoned up, less organized as advertising agencies and marketing agencies, doing a lot of work in the war propaganda effort, and then seeing that there is a shift post-World War II. There's significant industrialization, there's this emerging or returning workforce, and there's this public desire to spend, because the zeitgeist here that has shifted was one from rationing during wartime to, hey, we won, this is prosperity, we're victorious, so we want to spend. We want to have really physical kind of consumer examples of our prosperity, of our being victorious, of the American dream. And so what we see is that purchasing now becomes patriotic. And yes, this DuPont ad always really cracks me up. No offense if someone from DuPont is on the line, but babies wrapped in cellophane. Later on, we learned that wasn't a great idea. But just to show kind of this newness of these convenience and largely single-use and disposable items, and how that advertising had shifted during that time. So we have this perfect storm. We have the workforce, we have the industrial capability, the manufacturing capability, we have purchasing power, and we have this significant attitudinal shift where people are saying, I'm tired of rationing, I'm tired of not having stockings and food and all the things that I actually really want, these creature comforts. I want the exact opposite. I want to go ham, I want to have excess, I want things to define my status in this country and show myself and my country that we are winners. So it's a perfect storm, and this is where you see the rise of advertising and marketing agencies, because they were like, hey, this perfect storm, we're onto something. Now we can make money off of this. This is really where traditional marketing began. Of course, there were marketing efforts before then, but this is really where it became a machine, if you will. So just to give you an example, we're seeing these were more wartime kind of, messaging, like reinforce your clothes, make, do, and mend. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler, which is a terrifying thought. Don't waste food, right? So a very measured communication and approach to living in the United States, and also anywhere at the time that was fighting in World War II. And then it morphs into this, and this is one of my favorite advertisements, this after total war can come total living. And it's this couple looking over this, this almost like metropolis of very modern, expensive, refined homes. We're seeing people want bigger cars, larger homes. We're seeing the advent of the suburbs, essentially. And then we're also seeing people want more convenience items that they've never had before. They're eating more meat than they ever have before. They're engaging in consumerism around convenience foods and fast food. So everything about life went from this measured, more minimal, make, do, and mend, fewer, better kind of approach to complete and total opposite, more maximalist luxury, because the purchasing power, the attitudinal will, and the workforce and industrial manufacturing conditions were all there to make that possible. And so marketing really met that demand. And what we see is this really attendant rise in harmful global emissions that start to emerge from this time period. By and large, obviously there were some contributions, but post-World War II industrialization, we see an enormous spike in there. There's our friend from the office showing that. And what's most interesting is that we still see that spike even to today. Sometimes it levels off slightly, but really there is an inextricable link between obviously industry and manufacturing, but also consumerist habits and harmful global emissions, i.e. climate change. So traditional marketing that's been rooted in this, I love this picture. This is the a coveted kind of watch, a retirement watch that I think is also very much like rooted in boomer generations and older thinking around workforce and brand loyalty. But baby boomers experienced both this boom in pervasive marketing, as well as a pretty significant time period of cultural and financial prosperity. And so the idea of what companies do and their responsibility, especially in the United States, was seen as very simple. It was seen as capitalistic and solely economic, and that their duties were to create reliable products and services, hopefully to offer that at a decent value or an accessible price, and if applicable, to make their shareholders money. There really wasn't this imperative or this ethos that companies are social contributors, that they're essentially living, breathing entities that have to take a stand, that have to mirror the values of their customers. There wasn't that expectation. And so companies kind of coasted a little bit, and they were like, sweet, my job's to make money, I'm into it, And then companies later on, when there was more social and cultural upheaval, companies that got too involved in that could actually see some negative impacts in their boomer consumers and older. So brand loyalty is an extreme hallmark of baby boomers and older, especially legacy brand loyalty. So for instance, that idea of, well, my parents bought a Ford, so I'm going to buy a Ford, or, you know, my grandmother had this kind of range, and so I buy that kind of range. That was very much a reliable form of kind of word of mouth legacy marketing. And that is very different from how millennials and especially Gen Z interact with companies and product services, as well as marketing and messaging. And boomers, I will give you this. I actually dislike using the term boomers because I think it's gotten a negative connotation pretty unfairly, but just for shorthand in this presentation, I'm going to keep using it. But they care a lot more about sustainability than they're credited for. But this has been linked through longitudinal data actually to the influence of Gen Z, which is a very pervasive and communicative culture around shifting our notion in consumerism, and very influential. So we're going to dig more into that. All right, so booming but not boomers. What younger generations value? Now, this is from research that I've done and work that I've done with a variety of companies on all levels of growth and position, and pivoting their marketing specifically toward millennials and Gen Z when it comes to communicating their sustainability initiatives, products, and services. So similar in that they can be lumped as younger, emerging, and potential consumer groups, but a little bit different. So Gen Z makes up about a quarter of the US population. Their current buying power is $44 billion, or doll hairs, as I like to say. But by 2020, they were expected to account for 40% of all consumers, and largely they have realized that. So 72% are willing to spend more on sustainable goods. This is the group that is very much concerned with sustainability, and not just sustainability in a vacuum. Sustainability to Gen Z and a little bit to millennials is a much more holistic undertaking. They see sustainability as intersectional, as interconnected with all sorts of other social justice, human rights, issues. They see it all as interconnected, and rightly so, because it is. And so they expect their sustainability to be inclusive, interconnected, self-aware, and constantly evolving. And they're willing to pay a significant amount more for a product that has the sustainability cachet. On the flip side of that, and this is why it's so important that companies and organizations get on board with understanding what these emerging consumers want, is that this is the generation that is most likely to boycott a company, a product, a service, anything like that, if they have a negative experience, or if they find that your messaging is inauthentic or just flat out lies around a product. They also have, they're an extremely high touch generation, extremely immediate communication generation. So companies, I think a lot of times really should fear more than they do the impact of Gen Z having a negative experience or uncovering inauthenticity with a company's marketing around sustainability, and just slamming them on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. The impact of that is so weighty. And I think a lot of times we kind of brush it off like, a bunch of kids, like, who cares? They're just chatting. But they're future consumers and existing consumers. So it is really important to understand that this group will love you and leave you if their brand loyalty does not mean a lot to them if they feel like there's not a lot of authenticity behind it, and they will call it out. Another thing that I think is really important is sustainability is not just vital and a huge value proposition for Gen Z because it's trendy. This is the generation that has grown up hearing about climate change the most. They're starting to see the physical manifestations of it. And this is the generation that also significantly holds a very high amount of what we call climate anxiety or climate doomism, almost to the point where we are seeing practitioners say that they are having, like therapists are having people come to their offices with the express purpose of working through their climate anxiety. So this is the generation that's feeling the weight of climate anxiety so significantly, to the point where 40% have actually said they have significant fears around having children. And then we also need to acknowledge that they're born as digital natives. This is an incredibly high touch information sharing and sometimes misinformation sharing generation. And they see climate change and activism as just part of being a person on this planet, and they expect companies to do the same. Now, millennials might be a little bit more familiar with them because arguably right now they have a significant lion's share of purchasing power. They're making more money, they're older, they're more well established. So you can see that there. But 75% are eco-conscious to the point where they're willing to change some of their buying habits and pay a little bit more for a product. They're not yet quite at the point of Gen Z where they're like, oh yeah, I would pay significantly more for a product. And they're also a little less likely to boycott a brand if their sustainability claims come up short or come up inauthentic. And then 68% feel somewhat concerned or very concerned about climate change, still a pretty good chunk of them. And what I think is really a feather in the cap to millennials is that they, or we rather, were born kind of straddling two technological places. So this lower tech existence, you know, where we didn't have phones and we didn't have kind of this high touch immediate communication, but then also still very fluent in these emerging technologies. And that's why I think for certain communications and messaging roles, millennials make great employees because they can understand the needs of a variety of generations because they've straddled kind of both of those. And they're more likely actually to be involved in activism than Gen Z or Gen X, and they see climate change as a social justice issue as well. So what these generations have in common is that they require that companies exercise social responsibility beyond just that kind of boomer notion of contributing to the economy. So they expect that when something happens, social injustice, human rights crises, anything like that, political changes in policy or legislation, that companies take a stand. These generations also have an automatic suspicion of established companies. So this is completely the opposite of boomers and to a certain extent a little bit of Gen X. They are suspicious of things that their parents liked, brands that their parents trusted. Instead, they kind of, they like things that have a fast growing freshness like startups. And they really want humanness and storytelling and also humility and vulnerability in a brand's marketing and messaging. And we'll kind of get more into what that means more explicitly later in the presentation. And they have this broader, more unwavering requirement, I think rightly so, for representation and inclusivity, not tokenism, not just like, oh, you know, I'm doing an advertisement for women, so I'll have a woman in there, but rather true inclusivity and kind of every metric of diversity and inclusion that you can think of. They really want to see themselves in a company's work and their messaging, but they also want to see that a company understands them and in a way embraces who they are, their individuality, but also those differences and sees those differences as something that's beautiful and socially contributive, and something that's well worth including in a company's visuals and marketing in an authentic way. And I love this personally. They are much more likely to embrace a fewer but better ethos. So they tend to favor minimalism and portability. So we see a lot of folks who are into kind of digital nomadism and this perceived freedom that comes from it. So it is a little bit of a different ideology, though these generations do own homes. They do kind of root themselves in place. They're not defined by place rootedness, nor are their goals driven by it. So they love kind of this freedom of working from home, digital nomads, traveling and doing work that they're passionate about, but also having fewer things to weigh them down as they pursue that. And Gen Z specifically, I think this is one of the most important things. And I believe it myself as well. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't believe it, but they really believe that their individual actions can make a difference. Even if they overwhelmingly experience this climate anxiety that stymies them somewhat, they believe their individual actions can make a difference. And a lot of times they kind of soothe themselves and root themselves in activism by finding community. So this is really important for marketers to understand. They've been deemed the most disruptive generation ever. I think anecdotally, we all kind of understand that to be possible. They greatly influence the purchasing values of 3+ generations behind them. overwhelmingly digital first. They're very browsing specific as well. And they're much more likely to engage in the secondhand rental and sharing economies, especially when it comes to clothes and consumer goods. And they're the most diverse and culturally fluid generation. You know, traditions, systems, and norms are just not automatically accepted. Everything is questioned, everything can be dismantled, and everything can be reinvented. And that can be really daunting to some companies, especially these very rooted, long-standing, have been around for 100+ years doing business and it worked for us then kinds of companies. It can be really daunting to bring in and appeal to this emerging consumer group and their needs in a way that resonates with them, because you know, so often marketing is really rooted in legacy. Hey, you know, we've time tested, you know, this is a tradition, you can trust us. That doesn't mean a lot to these consumers. They want to see something different, and we'll get more into specifically what they want to see. We talked about boycotting brands due to inaction or misalignment with values. And they respond best, we have a lot of longitudinal data around this, to short visual marketing like videos, TikToks, things like that. And they really appreciate design aesthetics. So they see themselves as part of your brand if they bought in, and they want it to be a beautiful, personalized, engaging experience that doesn't require a heavy lift on their part to be involved in. So I'm just going to get into a few things of what you can do right now, because I'm sure that you're like, okay, great, thanks for the history lesson, but what does this mean for me and my team as we try to pivot, or at least bring in these consumer groups into our marketing, into our communications, into our advertising, and into our product development, so that we're meeting their needs. So the first recommendation here is to build trust. They're especially sensitive to greenwashing, which is incredibly pervasive, obviously, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, a lot of us have eclectic backgrounds. Sustainability, even 20 years ago, was not really an area of focus for a lot of companies. It certainly wasn't considered the norm. It certainly wasn't folded into an organization's goals or product development. And so greenwashing, you know, it's like the Wild West out there with a lot of products. You don't have as many kind of independent third-party certifying bodies that are going to be regulating or creating a similar lexicon for, are these products sustainable? Are these services eco-friendly? And so there's a significant amount of greenwashing out there. I mean, you can go to any kind of store that sells even like personal care products, and you'll see claims that are completely unregulated. So it is a bit Wild Westish, and these younger generations have become more suspicious of greenwashing, and thus more suspicious of companies generally making environmental claims, even if they're very genuine and actualized. So here's a few things that I think are really important to remember if you want to build trust with millennials, but especially with Gen Z. You need to go above and beyond what's required and engage with reputable third-party certifiers. So this is, I think, very important. If you haven't already, we actually see growth in this in more of like the personal care and kind of beauty space with cruelty-free, which I consider to be a rung of sustainability. For a long time, there were programs like Leaping Bunny and PETA Bunny. Those were kind of independent certifiers, but it was expensive for companies to have that designation. It was more arduous around the reporting and the verifying, and there wasn't as much of a social understanding or consumer education around why those designations matter. So, you know, taking it upon yourself in your respective industry to go above and beyond what's required to get some of those third-party certifications, and then to find ways to communicate that you're doing that because you care, not because you have to, because you want to. That is really important. These very visual generations that have a significant amount of decision fatigue as well. So they want to be able to look at a product, a website at a glance and say, ah, I got it. And so the second part of that is using engaging and at a glance iconography. A good example of this being successful has been over at Etsy. They actually have a complete kind of almost like iconography lexicon on their website by which you can search for products that have the kinds of values that are important to consumers. So if you're looking for something that's vegan, you're looking for something that's cruelty-free, that's fair trade, that's made in America, they've made all of those searchable, but they also made all of those incredibly visual so that consumers can see that and go, ah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Great. And it builds a certain amount of trust because they've also had an attendant educational process for both sellers, but also for consumers, so that everyone's on the same page with this visual language. And it makes people's lives easier. Consumers feel more satisfied, and they're grateful that companies are offering this as a way to search or understand their products better. Employ generationally appropriate storytelling. If your marketing is not telling a story, if it's just, if it's just the facts, ma'am, and it is resting on legacy and tradition, you're missing out on the entire emerging group of consumers that will be a lion's share of your consumers in the next 10 years. So engaging with storytelling marketing is really important, and making sure that that storytelling is human. So not just communicating what you're doing well in the realm of sustainability, but communicate where your developmental areas are. These are generations that like vulnerability. They don't see it as a weakness. They aren't looking to companies to be perfect. They're looking to companies to be human and participatory in society. So they want to see that you have weaknesses, that you have areas that you're recognizing, and you're self-aware enough that you want to fix them. And then what are you doing about it? And how are you telling a story around that? And there are some companies that aren't sustainable at all that do a beautiful job of that. So look at companies like that and then actually do a genuine job of it is a good recommendation there. And then utilizing fresh and unexpected marketing techniques. So they're very suspicious of traditional marketing, and alternative approaches are seen as more trustworthy, more vanguard. And then authentically inclusive in all the ways. So consumers won't buy from you if they don't see representations of themselves in your marketing, and they definitely won't engage with a brand that seems to have a distaste for their identity or values. Build credibility. Okay, so this one is, I think, a really interesting one. I was at South by Southwest a month ago, and I was on a panel with a lot of sustainability directors from large companies that do widespread energy provision, that make diesel engines, that make global tech. And what was so interesting was that a lot of the audience members had questions for the sustainability directors around, well, what are you doing for me as a consumer? I know what you're, I know that you're in the minutia, you're in the weeds around your ESG, around your product development, you're very into that, but what are you doing for me as a consumer to make my life easier, to help me to understand better what you're doing? And I think that this is really a number one thing that really great companies who care, who have foresight, and who are willing to do the work now so that they're future ready, is that they take the onus off of consumers, because there's so much responsibility placed on individuals. I'm someone who definitely believes that our consumer habits lead to negative impacts for the planet, but industry also has a huge hand in that: manufacturing, marketing, production. And so taking responsibility for that in a practical, actionable way by engaging in things like buyback programs, recycling, circularity. Planned obsolescence is real. We've seen that rise up since post-World War II industrialization. Gen Z is acutely aware of that fact, that things are made to be replaced quickly and that can't be repaired. And they're also aware that the onus is on them for the life cycle of a product. And they see that as unfair. So companies that actually take a step further to say, all right, we're starting a buyback program, or we're taking back these items. We'll come to your house, we'll get that, we'll refurbish it, we'll make sure that we responsibly recycle or dispose of it at end of life. That's something that feels someone at South by Southwest who actually asked a question in the audience said, that feels very relaxing to me. And that's important. If you're doing storytelling and you're also concerned about sustainability, you want the consumer, this younger consumer who's already stressed about climate change, to feel like you've got them. Like they're going to buy a product from you, you're going to be responsible for some of it and take a little bit of that burden off of them. So that's the number one thing to do to build credibility. Take a clear and genuine position on social issues. Companies that don't get this won't get it. And by it, I mean they will not win with this consumer group. Gone are the days where companies can be impartial. about social justice issues, things like that. Gen Z will call you out on it. They will boycott you because inaction is seen as taking an action. So whatever that genuine stance is for your company, this isn't just like, oh, it all has to be progressive or liberal. Whatever is genuine for your company, you know, that is something that is now expected, because you're not just a company. You're not just there to make money and contribute to the economy. You're also a living, breathing collection of human beings in the eyes of Gen Z. Sacrificing profit for principle, we've seen wildly successful, and I mean more ideologically successful campaigns from REI, from Lush, where they're bucking this trend of Black Friday sales and instead they're saying, hey, you know, don't come to our stores. Our stores are closed. We want to give our workers a day off, or we want you to go outside. REI's opt out campaign was incredibly successful with Gen Z and with millennials, and very much kind of similar to that Patagonia "don't buy this jacket" in application. And the impact of that around brand loyalty really sticks, because these younger consumers say, ah, damn, they care about me. They're not worried about turning a profit. And that's something that's going to win you a lot more sales and a lot more brand loyalty in the future. And then have real-time communication. So solicit consumer opinions, give them a channel through which they can connect and create community in a meaningful way. They want a touch point with your company. I'm just checking on the time because you know I can just run on. Okay. Building cool. So cool is a relative term here, but to emerging consumers, if you engage with the right fit influencers, and I say right fit, that is an important caveat. You do not want to have someone who completely has no relationship to your product, your service, your company. But sometimes it's a really good fit. Sometimes if you find the right fit kind of influencer or celebrity, it can be fantastic for the optics and exposure of your work. So this has the opposite impact with older generations, but you have to remember Gen Z especially has basically been reared looking at these social media influencers, and who then turn into celebrities, as kind of like their trusted sources for news, for reviews, for everything. So you need to be at least attentive to this and then leverage it wisely. You need to have an innovative, responsive, and active social presence. I can't tell you how many companies I know of who are doing really great work in sustainability, but they're spread so thin, and they might have an Instagram account or a TikTok account, but they have like no content on it. No one's answering messages. It's basically dormant, missing a huge opportunity. And now is the time to start really ramping up on that opportunity, so that you don't miss out, so that you start to build that brand loyalty and those optics with especially Gen Z now. And then be relatable. I spoke earlier about how humanness and vulnerability are really important, and I mean this in a genuine way. I don't mean this like, you know, fake cry, crocodile tears, we messed up, oops, you know, kind of thing. Gen Z and millennials are very okay with companies messing up, but in an appropriate way, acknowledging it and saying what they're going to do better. They're okay with raw vulnerability. In fact, they expect it and they like it. So, you know, be open about your organization's shortcomings. Issue a very genuine mea culpa if something has gone wrong. You know, hey, we aim to do this, we fell short, but here's what we're going to do now, and here's how you can be a part of that. That's really exciting to these more emerging consumer groups. They want to see a real unpolished person. They don't want to see a boardroom of suits. They're not looking for perfection. And lastly, you need to build buzz. So I can't tell you how many organizations I've worked with that have the coolest things that they are doing around sustainability, for either product development or recycling, you know, and really taking responsibility for the end cycle or end life of their products or services, but they aren't building any buzz about it. Nobody knows about it. And we're talking about sustainability communications here, and marketing and messaging. So one thing I think is really important and interesting to consider that we don't see a lot of as standard is, yes, there are fantastic people, I'm sure, working at your organization who do ESG or CSR work, and they're, you know, in the back, like crunching the numbers, writing the reports, you know, verifying everything, and that is fantastic. Some of those folks may have completely untapped skill sets where they are masters at then translating this information into really engaging communications for a variety of audiences, but not all. So it may behoove your organization, it may be a boon to your organization to have someone who is in more of a director of sustainability communications or marketing type role. Honestly, that's what I end up being. Companies consult with me to do things like that because I understand the heady, cerebral, inside baseball stuff around these ESG reports, and I think it's exciting personally. But I also understand how not just different generations want to be marketed and messaged to, but how, different people and stakeholders in your organizations receive information. So your board members, if you have them, are looking for something completely different than people on social media are, than people in stores are, than people at trade organizations are, and certainly than people in the media are. So a role like this can really help you. I almost see it as like you go somewhere, you're trying to do important work, but you don't speak the language, but you know what needs to be done. They're your translators. They're going to be the people who are going to kind of carry you across and get those eyes on the important work that your organization is doing. So they kind of fulfill that translator role, that storyteller role, but also communicating to the media. If that is the right fit for you. But if you're doing something really exciting and really innovative, which I know some of y'all are, then is it going to be bad if you get some positive press? If Lester Holt's talking about what you're doing or something? No, that's awesome. That just puts you more on the radar of people who are interested in what you're doing. So you need someone also who can kind of communicate and pitch in that way. And I'm not saying that PR folks or people who do publicity for your team can't do that. But sometimes with sustainability stuff, especially, it's really important how we translate that into and how we craft messaging around that for different audiences. So I think that's something to really think about and to see, is there someone in your organization who you can give more of these responsibilities to? Do you have opportunity to have a position specific to this? Can you consult with someone who can do this kind of work for you? Because it really does elevate the optics, the public opinion, the brand loyalty, and the brand trust, especially in the public when you have someone who's really adroit at communicating sustainability initiatives and wins and developmental areas. That's something that I think is really unsung in this area, and it's just going to continue to be a growing need. And we're going to start to see a difference in organizations that have someone like that or a team like that and organizations that don't. All right, so hopefully I'm within the time limit, but I am so happy to take Q&A. I think, Sarah, you're gonna take it away with that, and also would love to connect with y'all if you have questions after the fact or you just wanna stay connected. I am mostly on Instagram and I also have a website.
Ashlee, thank you so much. I always love hearing you speak, partly because what you say is so in line with our messaging. I know I have a presentation on generational marketing, and there's so much.
It's so good too.
Oh, thank you.
It is freaking great.
Stop it some more. But it's your information is so complementary and not redundant, but complementary. And I learned so much from you today. Tips that I want to bring back to my team at Green Builder Media, although I know that most of my team is on and listening to you right now. So we all were texting and picked up some great tips. Thank you. I do have a couple of questions. We just have about 12 minutes. So first and foremost, I really loved what you said about humanizing brands and brand vulnerability. And, we really see that same thing coming through when we survey our consumer audience. As you know, we reach millions of early adopter and first mover consumers, the majority of which are now millennials and older Gen Zs. And I think that, what you said about being a humanized brand with vulnerability is actually not seen as a weakness. And that millennials and Gen Zs in particular want brands to be participatory, but they also want to participate and share ideas and share their stories with the companies that they engage with and work for. Can you give us some specific examples of brands that you see that are humanized and vulnerable and that maybe have, had a little hiccup or mess up that did a really good job of recovering through an authentic message?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are quite a few. I think they're smaller in a way. I think a lot of the examples that we see around doing this well, at least in a way that's resonant with Gen Z, are going to be brands that are more startup-y, and they go through the growing pains of being a startup right before their consumers' very eyes, and that's something that creates, I think, a lot of trust there. I'll pull out one example of just something that's kind of I'm wearing it right now. So these glasses are a company that actually just recently shuttered their operations, but for about 5 years they were making glasses from plastic water bottles from the Flint water crisis. So they were based in Flint, employing folks who lived in Flint who were also experiencing under-resourced unemployment, and they were also making use of plastic from that crisis. Awesome idea, really good execution, and I would say it was almost an organization that was buoyed by its consumer base, as opposed to looking to trying to have a very perfect persona to consumers. So they would solicit feedback on designs all the time, like colors, things like that. They would collaborate with a variety of artists in Flint and people to create new offerings that customers seemed to be interested in. And they would be super transparent about the issues they were experiencing. And never once did I hear about, a supply chain issue or a workforce issue or something they were experiencing, even like a cash flow issue. One of their hallmarks was paying people a livable wage for doing this work. And so obviously that means a slightly more expensive product. That also means that because real people are doing this and it's not like Luxottica or something like that, that you actually have to wait longer to get your product. And they would share that, and people would feel so much more invested. So even me, who's been in the sustainability game for a long time, I feel I still wear these, and I'll probably get my lenses changed when I have a new prescription, because I feel like I was a part of creating this product that I'm wearing, if that makes sense. And that is something that's very, very special to a lot of them. I think of another thing that's not a sustainable product, but like Emma Chamberlain, she's like a Gen Z kind of darling influencer person. I'm not as familiar with her work, but all my students would talk about her coffee company. And at one point she ran into a snafu with the sourcing of her coffee. They found that I think that's harvested by the nimble hands of children. You know what I'm saying? Like, not great. And she really acknowledged, like, yo, supply chains are hard. I'm newer at this. And she kind of issued like a mea culpa, like, we're going to do better. And people, like, she got more consumers than ever before. And a lot more like people actually like forgiving her and saying, that's okay, great. Thanks so much for admitting it. Like, now we're going to move forward, and that I'm so excited to like move forward with you. And that's just a big difference. I think, generationally, I think that older generations would have been like, yeah, you guys can't get your shit together. I'm not doing this, and instead it's considered a very human and cool thing to be flawed and to be vulnerable.
Thank you. That was a great response. Appreciate it. Now, you mentioned some of the important ESG attributes for products like cruelty-free, plastic-free packaging, vegan, made in America. What are you seeing with respect to trends in terms of, are there some that are more important than others, or some that have basically become the baseline? Talk about that a little bit, please.
I mean, it depends upon what industry you're looking at. I think for things like fashion, which I consider fashion to be a really great gateway drug into sustainability, especially for Gen Z. They're like, oh, we hate fast fashion. Now I'm an environmentalist. And I'm like, great, come through. I like it. We're seeing that people, so there was kind of like this rise of like recycled plastic types of clothing. And now I think we're seeing people becoming more tuned to zero waste pattern making. Like, they're understanding that it's less about like just the production cachet of something, and a lot more about like, even from the onset of how you're conceptualizing a product, are you looking at the whole life cycle of something, and are you looking at the waste generation of something? So traditional pattern making for fashion is extremely wasteful. There's offcuts all over the place. So people are now kind of thinking, oh, zero waste pattern making, that's cool. Zero waste fashion is cool. I think secondhand is becoming something huge. So instead of recycled, you see companies like Nordstrom that are just like, yeah, straight up, we're selling secondhand stuff. I mean, for way more than a thrift store, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they're getting into that because that's a huge buzzword. And then I think if you're looking at like the really advanced folks, they're talking about regeneration. They're talking about like from seed to garment, like, hey, we're like remineralizing the soil. We're using regenerative farming practices. Like, these are things that are very interesting, that I think folks who are a little bit more advanced in this world are looking for, and companies that want to get ahead of things are looking for. If we're talking about not fashion, I mean, there's a whole universe of stuff, but I mean, there aren't many people, I think, who think about how minerals are mined, or, how metals are manufactured, how we're getting, like, especially like, think about appliances. You guys might think more about this, but people on the outside looking in who are getting into sustainability, maybe their first touch point with anything was this recent debate around gas stoves and electric stoves. Like, I mean, that might be the first. And so thinking about, is something able to be repaired, I think is actually one of the sexiest things. And yet it's such an older concept. It's like a concept that if you'd taken my 109-year-old grandmother and told her she's buying a stove and it can't be repaired, she'd be like, what, my God, like, no. So I think that's something that we're getting these, like, it's not new, right? Like, minimalism isn't new. Repairing things isn't new. Having fewer but better is not new. Like, none of these are new concepts, but they're coming back again, and they're very important. And now they're kind of seen as having sustainability cred for companies.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
And I am going to ask you the same question that I asked you on our last conversation, because I loved your answer. And that is, there are some days when, I get a little discouraged and a little despondent, when we approve, drilling in the Arctic, or when I see that China is still, building new coal mines. And so what tips can you give to our audience about why to just keep the hope, keep the faith, and just continue to do the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I speak for a lot of us who've been doing work in this realm for a long time, when it wasn't popular, when it didn't win you friends and influence people. That's a really good exercise in strengthening your resiliency muscle, because if you're very passionate about something, then you feel like you're screaming into the void and nobody really cares about it. You can feel really lonely. So I think the biggest reason why we keep going, we have to keep going. Well, when we talk about climate change and climate anxiety and how pervasive that is among kind of all of us, but especially younger generations, what's the best antidote to anxiety, period? It's some kind of forward action, even if it's a small action. I love that phrase, like, just do the next right thing. So I feel like I'm okay with, though I really believe in the power of individual actions rolling up to become collective movements. We see that with the reparation of the ozone layer, for heaven's sakes. I'm a child of the 80s. We used to hear about that shit all the time. And now look, because of a bunch of concerned people rolling up to collective citizen action, more strides were made that eventually moved into government and policy regulation, industrial regulation. And now we've got an ozone that is really showing signs of healing itself. But beyond just that, individuals being powerful, collective movements, all that good stuff, I'm okay with doing something if it just makes me feel better. And by better, I mean, if it just makes me feel more powerful, more positively contributive. So, and I hear this all the time, even people who are like climate change deniers, who don't believe that what they can do makes a difference, or don't believe there's a problem at all. They'll be like, hey, I brought my own bag and that was pretty easy. Maybe I'll bring my own cup next time. I really believe that these small next right things, these small sustainable habits, are electric. They have such energy behind them, and the momentum not only makes you feel good, but also influences other people. And we know through research that we as individuals are way more influential than we give ourselves credit for. Just a basic person, not a basic person, but a person who's not like an influencer, regular social media following or none at all, you're influential beyond 3 degrees in your network. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. So people are watching you, whether you know it or not. Maybe you're doing a little sustainable habit. Maybe you inspire someone else. So those 3 kind of areas of it, I think 1, individual action really works. I really believe that. But 2, makes me feel better, assuages some anxiety. And then 3, when I do those things, and I'm saying I, but all of us, I'm influential without even trying to be. Those 3 things I think are all really freaking important. And, you know, I mean, I could go on to like, well, we have to have hope because hope is important, but that's not, I mean, for some people, it's like, no, I feel apathetic. Hope's not important to me. But those 3 concrete things, I'm like, party on, Wayne, because that 100% is something that is going, if we all adopted little bits of that attitude, it would help to lift us from this huge issue.
Well, Ashlee, thank you so much. As always, it was such a pleasure to share a camera here with you today. And thank you for your wonderful work. You are just so motivating and inspiring.